Hello Internet, it's Alex from Barefaced and I'm here waving a Vintage 30 at you. And I've been inspired to do this video because I had a lot of emails over the last few weeks or so because of a video that had gone sort of viral on the internet talking about how the sound of the Vintage 30 had changed a lot since a version from, I think it was 2006. And I emailed Celestion and asked them some questions about this, and it was basically like things have changed over time. But there's been no radical changes, etc, etc. And I was like, okay, cool, because I hadn't noticed anything, because I noticed these things. And Vintage 30s are our standard speaker in our 12-inch guitar cab, though we use lots of other ones as well. It's probably, I think, slightly more than half go out with different Celestion drivers and a few unloaded, and then the rest with Vintage 30s in the 12s. So a lot of people were kind of, I saw this video and then I saw, I've forgotten the chap's name. Anyway, I'll link to it when I remember what it is. And there were a lot of intelligent comments on his video with, you know, hypotheses about why this tonal difference was the case, because he'd actually done some measurements of it and demos, and you can hear the difference, it's very obvious. And I realised lots of people know quite a bit about this, but there's a lot of gaps in knowledge because guitar speakers are not very intuitive things. So I thought I'd try and explain a bit about why guitar speakers are different and what's different about them to the speakers that we're using for most purposes nowadays. I should be clear that actually all speakers are probably a lot more complicated than you realise. But yeah, guitar speakers, they're a sort of legacy device. They're speakers that started out as radiogram speakers, so early radios and gramophone combined units. Those speakers then got used in the early guitar amps, and it sort of went on from there and became the sound of electric guitar. So I'm waving this speaker at you. Let me tell you what the different bits are. So I want to focus in this video on the bit of the speaker you see. There's stuff going on in here that's very important. There's also stuff, if I can get the angle right, in here. Can you see that yellowish bit? That's the spider there. So that's another important bit. But when we're talking about mids and highs in guitar speakers, one of the key parts of the coloration is what's happening here. So yeah, I'll leave the electrical side of it for now and let's focus on vibration of different things and how those vibrating things generate sound. So this bit on the outside is the front gasket. So this is used when you rear load a speaker. So when you build a guitar cab in the traditional way of basically stapling on the grill cloth, so then that's fixed. And then to change the drivers, you unscrew the back, unscrew the drivers from behind, and screw them on like that. That's the easiest way to build a guitar cab. It's quicker and cheaper, it's easier to Tolex, it's easier to make the grills. Unfortunately, it doesn't work for our AVD cabs, which makes them quite a lot more expensive to build. Well, a lot more expensive to build, but you know, such is life. They sound better, so we think it's worth the extra cost. So this bit doesn't do anything sonically. It's just there, either as a front gasket for the seal against the baffle, or to make the driver look finished, essentially. That glues down on top of this bit here, which is called the surround. The surround, a lot of the time, comes from the cone vendor to the speaker manufacturer as one piece. Sometimes they might be glued afterwards. Sometimes it's doped, sometimes it isn't. Sometimes it's fabric, sometimes it's paper, sometimes it's literally the same papery card that the cone is made of. Then this bit is the cone. And then this bit here is called the dust cap. And dust cap is really selling it short. Yes, it stops dust getting into the magnetic gap where the voice coil lies and causing all sorts of sonic problems and death and destruction. But it's also better thought of as a central radiator, a dome. So think of the cone as producing sound and this dome also produces sound. I'll keep calling it the dust cap because that is what it's known as, and well, always has been. So that's the way it is. So this driver, Vintage 30, has some sort of pressed papery cardboard cone. What looks to me like a fabric surround And the advantage of a fabric surround is it can move further than a cardboard or paper surround without damage. But then because fabric is inherently porous to air, unless it's coated with something, like in a waterproof jacket would have a coating on the fabric, this has to be coated with what we call dope, and the doping materials vary, but generally you end up with this sort of shiny black look of the dope on it, and that makes it airtight. Now, when a cone is producing sound, the way it's producing sound is because the voice coil at the back here and inside there is moving backwards and forwards very rapidly. I mean, at say at 5 kilohertz, it's moving back and forth 5,000 times a second, which is a lot. That's quick. Yep. At low frequencies, it might be moving 40 times a second. That's around the bottom of a bass guitar, so that's an octave lower than guitar, but guitar with an octave pedal through an amp that's letting that through, yeah, 40 times a second. So even low frequencies, you're dealing with things that are moving fast. 40 times a second is pretty speedy. I doubt many of you can play 40 notes in a second. No, that would be ridiculous, wouldn't it? Surprised how many notes you can fit in a second, though, when you're going for it. Anyway, the power of whittling. So this vibrates backwards and forwards, starting at this point. I don't know if this light is showing it up, but you can actually see the voice coil former through here. Let me just crank the light up to the maximum to see if you can see the voice coil former. Good Lord, that's bright. So the shiny flat bit you see in there is the top of the pole piece, the magnetic pole piece. So there's a top plate, which is that bit there. So top plate is the shiny steel bit there, magnet, and then you have the back plate, which is joined to, don't want to drop this, the back plate and pole piece are as one. The pole piece goes through. So one of them is taking the, say, the south side of the magnet, and the other's the north side of the magnet, and you have a magnetic circuit. But if you can see that shiny bit there, the shiny circle is the pole piece, and surrounding that, which I can just about see, I don't know how to take my glasses off to see if the screen's working. God, joys of being over 40. Yeah, you can actually see the voice coil former through there. So that is what the voice coil is what creates an electromagnetic field, and then that interacts with the permanent magnetic field and pushes the voice coil former, which the voice coil is on, backwards and forwards, and that is glued to the cone, and that's what sets the cone moving. Gosh, that's bright. Let's turn that down a bit. So, once the cone gets moving, it doesn't move as a piston. It's not pistonic behaviour, except at very low frequencies, and a guitar speaker just isn't operating down in the pistonic region at all, or hardly at all. And even if it would be, it's not really a true piston because it's not stiff enough. And also there's too much variation in compliance between the stiffness of the outer surround and then the stiffness here that's supported by the spider and the magnetic circuit and the magnetic, essentially electrical magnetic suspension that's going on at the back end of it. So what we have happening is sound starting at the voice coil former and then basically heading outwards here. And it ripples out, it ripples round, so you get all this wiggling going on, like a drum skin or like a cymbal. It also sets this bit going, so this has its own ripples. And as you can imagine, the way any vibrating surface behaves depends upon things like its resonant frequency, so they're going to be caused by things like mass per unit area, mass per unit length, as with guitar strings or bass strings, and cymbals. So a thicker, heavier cymbal has a lower resonant frequency and lower resonant frequencies. And also, with a string, we know that if you tune a string tighter, that raises the resonant frequencies. That's how we tune our instruments. Making it stiffer raises the resonant frequency. So you've got this juggling act of stiffness versus mass per unit area, in the case of a cone. And you've also got damping, because the difference between a cone and, say, a steel string is that there's almost no damping in a metal. It's a crystal. It rings endlessly. Oh, my throat is tickling. And the paper, which is what, well, there's some hemp cones out there, but basically fibrous cellulose-based materials, creating a composite of these fibres in some sort of matrix that has its own stiffness, but it's also its own damping within it. So you can vary the formulation of the cones. Literally, if the paper is mashed for longer, so you've got shorter fibres in the paper, you end up with a more flexible cone. And you can introduce things like clays and other such binding agents within the paper that changes its damping, changes its behaviour. So there's a real art as well as a science and a lot of heritage in the good sense of heritage. So it's years of people messing around with cone formulations and finding out what sounds good, what works well. So that affects things. Now also on this cone you can see there are these ribs. Now on some drivers, yes, there's a very slight ripple. Yeah, you can see that ripple from the back. So some drivers, it's pressed in. Some of these cones, some of these, it's actually sort of formed as ribs on the top. This is closer to being formed thicknesses, but I think, no, I'm not sure. I'm not sure. These are not, some of them, it's a very concrete, there is a thicker bit on the front and the back is completely flat. This, we can see these relatively shallow ripples which are going to affect the way the modes propagate this way. I think what it actually causes is the modes that are the outward ripples to be facilitated, and the modes that are the longitudinal ripples heading round here, they don't want to ripple because you're going against the corrugations. By the way, just so you know what these little glue bits here, these are the tinsel leads. So this is how the power gets into your speaker. So you've got the terminals here, then you've got these very fine braided wires that have to move a lot, but also mustn't bang on the cone or rattle or buzz. And then they go through some holes in the cone and then down to the voice coil. So there's a sort of in and out thing. If you don't see these, it's because the dust cap's bigger and is covering them. So that's a Vintage 30. This is the Vintage 30 dust cap, which these videos were talking about. And I agree that actually, I think what may have happened is there's a change in, because dust caps can be doped, cones can be doped. We've also got glue joints that are going to change things. Every time you've got a glue joint, that is an interface for the vibrations. What will often happen at high frequencies, I think will always happen at high frequencies, you reach a point where the voice coil can push the dust cap fast, but the cone has too much inertia and doesn't keep up with it, and you end up with the dust cap moving and the cone hardly moving. And at the crossover point of that, you actually get a mechanical crossover from the glue joint there. Now, I don't think you'll get it so much with this because this dust cap is actually mounted on the cone. So with this, the dust cap movement is driven by the cone, but then the dust cap will set off as its own resonating device, generating extra high frequency that the cone can't do. I mean, there's a lot one could talk about on this subject, as I can tell, because I've been going for over 13 minutes. But what I'm just going to do is twiddle this round down to where I've got a few more guitar drivers down here to have a quick chat about, because once you start thinking about this, it gets quite interesting. Now you will see that these have got these cork surrounds. I think that's just a heritage thing. It's not going to affect the tone in any way at all. But if we start over here, this is the most old school of the Celestion drivers, ironically, because it's got a not very old school back. So this is the EVH, which is basically an old style Greenback, so 20 watt speakers, very low power. That appears to have a cardboard surround on it, so it won't handle a lot of excursion, but that's fine because it's only rated at 20 watts, and basically your excursion, yeah, if you double the power in, you increase the excursion by root 2 by 40%. So So yes, if you quadruple the power in, you're increasing the excursion twofold. So yeah, so that's then we've got the dust cap on that, looks to be, so that's a small dust cap, but again I think, yeah, I can't tell if that's glued onto the voice coil former or the centre of the cone, but it is a diddy little dust cap. You've then got, this is the more modern variant of the Greenback. So we've gone to a paper fabric doped surround to handle a bit more power. So that is going to change the behaviour quite a bit. Because one thing I didn't mention when I was waving things around is, although the sound starts here and heads outwards, so it starts at the voice coil and heads out, it doesn't necessarily stop here. It can reflect back, and you get that very clear part of the sound. Whilst if so, a soft surround will damp the cone resonances more, just like putting a felt damp around the edge of a drum skin, like you've sometimes seen on kick drums. So yeah, so that's Greenback with basically a different surround. I think on most of these Celestion drivers, you've got almost the same magnetic system. So Celestion seem to have two weights of ceramic magnet, the M and the H, and I think the same voice coil machinings on most of them, and the same voice coil diameter. So this is the G12M, so this is the Creamback. So this is essentially Celestion's design that superseded the Greenback in terms of trying to make a higher power one. And they're very similar looking speakers. I think the main difference between those is actually voice coil related. There could be other changes related to glues and insulation in the voice coil, which allows it to handle more temperature, to handle more power. This is then the H version, so this has a bigger magnet on it, so that's the big magnet one. You can see the different depths in the magnet. That's quite a lot heavier. Though that bigger magnet changed the behaviour, over damps it more, increases efficiency, you'll get more mids out of it, it'll be more dynamic, and I think because of that, yes, there's a difference. This is the lower power one, the M. This is the H, and the H has an M-roll surround. So there's the M-roll surround that my thumb is demonstrating. M-roll surround to handle greater excursion. This looks like a similar sort of M-roll surround, but it does not appear to be as deep. So that can't handle quite as much excursion. The limiting factor excursion-wise with these guitar drivers is actually the strength of the edge of the cone. And that shows up quite clearly because this is the Redback, this beefy thing. So this has the same size magnet as on the Creamback H under a red cover, but we've got a different dust cap, so it's got a much bigger dust cap. Is that a bigger voice coil? Hang on, I know the Creambacks are all the same size voice coil. Yes, there we are. So that is a Vintage 30. Vintage 30 there has the same size voice coils as the Creambacks and the Greenbacks. This one here has a larger voice coil, so hence 150 watt power handling, so you've got more voice coil area to get rid of the heat. And then with that they've gone to a larger dust cap, which is going to behave differently to that small dust cap. But then also, this was the point that I noticed from looking back at the emails I've been exchanging with Celestion's tech people a while ago, we have this M-roll surround, which is glued on and doped, comes to here, right on the cone. Whilst this Redback here, M-roll surround, but it extends further onto the cone, which I presume is to reinforce this edge to make sure that the cone doesn't crease and sound bad. Because if it starts creasing in motion, it will distort, it will not sound nice, and then it will permanently crease and you will actually end up with distortion at much lower than the rated power levels. And then one other speaker I grabbed whilst I was looking through things, this is the A-type, which is Celestion's Fendery sound. So this is probably the same size magnet, though not hidden under a cover, that you find on the M's. It feels about that weight. I'd be surprised if they went for an even smaller magnet. I think the sensitivity is about the same, so that would be logical. And then here, you've got a more of a sort of cardboardy surround. So these cardboardy surrounds, they are not going to damp the reflections of when the ripples reach the edge, like these fabric surrounds. But of course, the doping is going to affect it, the fabric weave's going to affect it. Essentially, what you've got with all these guitar drivers is a bizarre resonating system that is not reproducing guitar sound, it's creating guitar sound. This is why your guitar has no sound until it connects with the air via a speaker. You know, electric guitars make some sound that you can hear, but that's not the tone you're after. The tone you're after is the tone collected by the pickups. That's electrical. Right through the amp it's electrical, right into the voice coil it's electrical, and it's that voice coil to cone interface that we go from an electrical system to an acoustic system, and it's then that cone via the cabinet into the air and then to our ears. That's where we actually get tone. So this is a strange, resonating, complex system built on years of heritage and years of experimentation, and a lot of it driven by the hunt to get louder. Yeah, I think that's been a big driver, and then those louder bits of equipment having a different sound, and that inspires us. And you know how it is with music gear, you know, we have something for one thing and then that makes us think of something else, and we're off, a new riff gets discovered and we start a new song and then end up with something that's a corollary of a bit of tech. That's been quite a common theme in music. If you actually look at eras where new music was created, often the starting point for that music was a bit of technology, be it the electric guitar for rock and roll, or the bass guitar for rock music, or going back earlier, the kick drum pedal to let you do jazz. You know, in the sort of modern sense. Was that the 20s? Was it a little earlier? Anyway, I digress. So that was me talking about this sort of vibrating cone paper. I should say speaker cones can be made of lots of other materials, and outside of the world of guitar and bass, they are. But in the worlds of guitar and bass, and bassists out there, if you've stopped watching this video ages ago, because I hadn't actually mentioned bass, you've missed out, because actually all this stuff relates to bass as well. It's just with bass we also have this other puzzle of trying to handle a lot more power and move a lot more air. So it's a sort of, yeah, it's a bigger challenge. That's why there's more specialist bass cab companies, because we've had a fight on our hands to get heard and get our tone out. So it'd be useful to have a camera person, wouldn't it? But we're busy making actual products and not just making videos. Yeah, I'll talk about the electrical stuff if you're interested on another of these videos, so actually what's happening at the voice coil and the magnetic side of things, because that is interesting too. But it's just fascinating to sort of poke at these things and yeah, I doubt you'll hear the difference, but there's different resonant frequencies on them, different. Oh yeah, that one rings for longer. Yeah, self-tapped. Anyway, I'll stop playing percussion on guitar speakers. See you next time. I've been Alex from Barefaced. Tell your friends. Is that what you say on this? Share, like, subscribe. Rock on. I'm too far from the button now.